So I guess I should call the meeting to order. What's the first thing on the agenda? Roll call. Would you do a roll call, please, Faye?
Randy Rickard,
Here.
Jason Dale,
Here.
Chris Wright,
Here.
Linda Newton Curtis,
Here.
Matthew Mansfield,
Here.
Jose Valapando. He said he was going to be here on Zoom, but it looks like he has not arrived yet. So,
Should we wait?
um,
So I think the first thing on the agenda is the consent calendar. And are there any comments on the minutes from the last meeting in July? Okay, hearing none.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the meeting minutes from the 7/10/2025 meeting.
Oh, we did. Okay, so that shows I'm totally off. Oh, you were, you moved to approve. Okay, sorry. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Wright will second. Or whoever made it first.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Minutes are approved.
just there's no public comments for anything that is not on the agenda. No one's in the Zoom.
So moving on to the staff report, since there are no public comments.
Okay, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I'm here tonight to present or to facilitate your discussion on the code maintenance package. This is the second of two work sessions which you've scheduled to prepare for a public hearing on this item, which is currently scheduled to come before the Commission on September 11th. I was not planning on going over each item line by line or page by page, as in your prior work session we went over all, I think, 25 of the concepts. But what I would like to do is provide you with an update on those items that you had discussion on and you had specifically requested some information which the staff had prepared in response to some of the questions that you had. So what I would suggest we do is, first off, I just wanted to provide some orientation to the document. What you have is a draft package of code amendments. So this is the language with strikeouts and underlines that would be presented to you in a public hearing. The document retains the commentary, so the boxes under each amendment are describing the purpose for the change and providing any background for that. Those comment boxes will be removed in the final version of the ordinance that comes before City Council. Although what we did in the last round that I think was helpful for everyone was providing a second set so that anyone could reflect back on the reasons that the city was initiating these changes. So in the staff memo and the staff report, it goes over the process, which I've described. We've included some research and some information. There were three items in particular that you wanted more information on. One was on this proposal that for setbacks, for garage setbacks where the garage is less than 20 feet to the street, the staff were suggesting that we add an appearance standard or a window requirement to that side of the garage that was facing the street. So we've included some examples of what that might look like, and that's in Exhibit B1. Exhibit B2 has research from looking at other jurisdictions in our area for how they regulate fence height in residential zones. So that we thought would be helpful to the Commission to see that other jurisdictions have different standards, and ours is not unusual, but there are other jurisdictions that have allowed taller fences really the takeaway from that. And the third item was relating to institutional developments or institutional uses like schools, where they have accessory structures in a residential zone, and the staff were considering whether there should be a greater allowance for those accessory structures like sheds, modular classroom buildings, and workshops and so forth on those institutional properties. Although they're in a residential zone, it didn't seem really appropriate to hold those uses to the same limitation that a house would have, which is only 2 accessory structures. So we did some research into a number of different properties in town that have institutional uses like schools, and that's in Exhibit B3. What we were trying to discern is like, is there a metric that we could propose that would scale that based on lot size? So we were looking at the lot coverage by accessory structures, and what we found was that the percentage of a lot that's covered by those smaller buildings in most cases is minuscule. It's like less than 1% of the site. So it didn't really seem reasonable to try to regulate in that way. So when we get to that part of the proposal, I'll talk a little bit more about what the staff are proposing for that. So, and there was one concept that we presented on July 10th that's not part of this package, and that is for updating the landscaping requirements. The staff had identified a need for having a more explicit requirement for when someone submits a landscape plan for their commercial property or multifamily property. And when we looked at the code more closely, it occurred to us that there are other provisions of that landscaping chapter that need work. It's not as simple or straightforward as just being adding a plan submittal requirement. There are standards in that section that are well, they're outdated, they're contradictory, they're not really consistent with best practices. So we thought rather than making this piecemeal change, what we'd like to do is study that more comprehensively and come back to the commission. And if you believe that it merits an update, then we would add that to the work program. So, and Leanne Wagner could talk more about, what the thought process was on that, but not to spend your time on it at this point. So those were, I think, the 3 areas or 3 or 4 topics that that we've sort of fleshed out or had to research further. And what I'd like to do for your work session is really just to focus on those areas where there were substantive changes or policy choices or decisions that you could make. So if we can go down into the table, and I didn't highlight this in the version that was posted to the website, but what you'll see on the screen and beginning on page 5 of that, or page 4, thank you. So at the bottom of page 4 in the staff report, in the table, that's again the proposal that we would update the landscaping plan. I've already discussed why that's not included. The next area where we had some feedback, and I just wanted to highlight this. It's not actually highlighted in the document, but on page 5, so if you go up to page 5, and the third item down from the top is planned unit development design standards. And it was pointed out that the text was unclear as to whether those design standards apply to planned unit developments that are PUD with, or if you just had a PUD with single family lots. The purpose of a planned unit development is to provide flexibility in the development standards and to allow some discretion and how that's designed. So, but also requiring a higher level of design. So if the development is taking that pathway, we're not just looking at setbacks, lot coverage, building height, we're also looking at the design quality of the project. And so the code has a point system and a number of criteria that you go through when evaluating PUDs, and it it occurred to us that really that isn't limited to multifamily developments. It's also applied when we have single-family subdivisions as part of a PUD. So what we discussed that in the last meeting, but what I wanted to call your attention to with this one is that the legislative session just ended or in June, and some of the outcomes of that session were well, a whole slew of housing bills, again, another round of housing legislation. And Senate Bill 974 may affect how we regulate design, residential design. And so, although we are recommending to go forward and to make this code maintenance clarification, we may be back as we understand more about what the legislature is requiring, and as LCDC adopts new rules to implement that legislation, we might be having to revisit this, is what I'm trying to say. We may be limited in how we can apply these standards to housing. So not to be too obscure or cryptic about it, the state has preempted again what cities can require or how we regulate housing. And Senate Bill 974 is one bill that we're not required to apply it at this point. We will await rulemaking by the state, but the likelihood is that the state will limit what we can require of planned unit developments. So I just wanted to call your attention to that. There's nothing different in the proposal from what was discussed at the last meeting, but it's something that we're looking at with the legislation. So going down to the next page.
This is Commissioner Wright. May I? Yes, Senate Bill 974 was enrolled. And to me, it looks like when it comes to land use application changes, it applies to zone changes, PUDs, and variances, and now will require no public hearing unless appealed. Written notice must be sent to nearby property owners and community organizations. A 14-day comment period before decisions. And decisions must include clear reasoning and criteria. But then the design standard restrictions. Local governments cannot impose residential design standards on developments with 20 or more units or multifamily structures. And when I looked up our technical, what the definition for multifamily, if you click on the link in any one of our documents, it says occupancy of 3 or more families, and it includes assisted living facilities, but yet federal and state describes multifamily structures as 5 or more dwellings per property or individual tax lot. But also they also apply it to apartment buildings, senior housing, independent living, and intermediate care. And I don't know if we need to add that to our Newburgh Municipal Code definitions as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Wright. So as you've observed, there's a lot of complexity in this, and the state has to go through the rulemaking process to define what is required of cities as we implement that bill. So rather than trying to get ahead of that process, what we're suggesting at this point is make the corrections and clarifications to the code that we're aware of. And as new state rules come down, we will approach those accordingly and vet those with the Planning Commission and the community to determine the appropriate response. So does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I see that they go in effective not till July 2026, so it wouldn't be a part of today's workshop. But then the design standard restrictions expire January 2nd, 2023. So that's 7 years that they removed them and then want you to start them up again. And I don't know how realistic that is and how much that will then cost the city or people then going in front of the board. So I commend you, staff, for trying to figure that one out.
And we'll continue to track that. And so by way of example, in 2024, the legislature approved House Bill 1537, and that had other preemptions or requirements that cities were not required to incorporate into their codes, but instead would apply directly from the statute, because similar to the bill that you just read from, Commissioner Wright, that one had a sunset date or an expiration of I think 2032. So they adopt these rules, and it's almost as if they're, I don't want to say experimental, but they're implemented for a short time, I think, to see how, what the effect is, or if they have the outcome that was intended. And then the legislature, of course, could revisit that. They could remove the sunset date, or they could, adopt a new bill that requires the same or different things. So rather than chasing our tails and, trying to implement or comply with a moving target, our approach is, one, if there's rulemaking that's forthcoming from the state, that we monitor that, we participate to the extent that the council wants us to engage with that. And then, of course, we endeavor to comply with the law. And where there are bills that have requirements that will sunset or expire at a certain date, rather than adopting code language that we then need to remove later, or may want to remove later from our code, we would apply the statutes directly. And that's not it's not routine, but it's not unheard of. There are other statutes that we apply directly rather than amending our codes. So, thank you. That's why I wanted to point this out, because it's something that we'll be coming back to. That's the takeaway. So really the bulk of what I wanted to share with you this evening is summarized on pages 6 and 7 of the staff report, and are detailed on or between pages 14 and 24 of the code amendments document. So I'll summarize what we have here in the table, and then we can dive into the particular code amendments if you'd like, if you have questions or you want to discuss those in more detail in the code amendment attachment. So the first one that we've addressed here is the garage entrance and orientation setback, which you discussed at your last meeting. And it was, the commission wanted to see some examples of what we were talking about. So in attachment B1, which is at the very, or near the end of the document, and Faye, if you wanted to scroll to that, there are images of side-loaded garages, examples of what the standard would address. Yeah, it's the next one after that, I believe. It's photographs. Yeah, that's it. So this is really the scenario that we're considering. It could be cottage housing, or it could be just conventional single-family homes, or it might be attached housing, but where access to the garage is provided from an access easement or a shared driveway, not a street, not facing the street. There is there is a restriction on how close a garage can be to the street property line, and it's 20 feet. And what we found through the Colina, reviewing plans for the Colina project, and just my experience with other communities that allow courtyard housing and other sort of alternative configurations for homes, is that placing the house closer to the street, notwithstanding the garage being there because it's side loaded, you can have an appropriate sort of architectural design of that garage that doesn't have a garage appearance. And that's really what we're trying to get at here, is that although the garage would be allowed to be placed within 15 feet of the street in most zones, the staff had recommended that we require some window coverage on that side elevation because it's a longer elevation. And without some architectural detailing, it would be a blank wall. Now that's subjective and it's a judgment call for the commission if that's something that you wanted to consider. The staff had recommended that we include that. So that's really the only, I guess, change or refinement to what we had discussed at the last meeting is that we've looked at this and these are examples of how that would apply. So I can pause there if there's any comments, questions, discussion.
I personally like the idea of that aesthetic approach. I think anything that we can do to make Newburgh look as appealing as possible is always a good thing.
And thank you. And I should have mentioned the standard is it's 10% of the surface area of that facade, which, and we just estimated that, you know, based on a 22 to 24 foot deep garage, 8-foot ceiling height, about 180 square, yeah, 180, no, excuse me, about 18 to 20 square feet would be the 10% of that surface area. So, you know, windows come in all different dimensions, but a 3x3 window, 9 square feet, you know, that would be like 2 3x3 windows. You could orient them any way you wanted. It could be a, you know, a skinnier transom window that would be up high. You don't want people looking into your garage. It could be, you know, any configuration of those. But the point is to break up the facade and show some detailing along the street.
Anybody else have any thoughts about it?
I absolutely like it.
Me too.
I guess I agree with this plan. My next question would be, do we need some sort of different number if the garage orientation is not in line with the street? Or I'm going to get depending on how you look at it, normally a garage is perpendicular to the street. So in this instance, we're asking to put the garage non-perpendicular to the street.
Right.
So is there going to be some sort of number or distance from when the garage is non-perpendicular, it needs to be a minimum of X away that's then less than 20 feet? And what is that number?
Yeah.
Did I miss that?
Commissioner Mansfield, yes. So the minimum setback is 15 feet.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
so it's really just a degree of 5 feet that would allow this. It's allowing a placement closer to the street by 5 feet, provided you do this treatment along the side. Not everyone would take advantage of it. In some cases, it yard, so you can actually use it. You know, put a patio or something in there.
Well, and I know this is off the beaten path, but windows allow light, and with people struggling with mental illness, they know that in Oregon with their cloud cover just helps with mental health, having a lit area. So I think that is wonderful and helping to also address mental health.
Okay, sounds like there's consensus. We'll bring that forward as part of the public hearing draft. The next item that the commission had discussed back in July is highlighted here next, and it relates to institutional properties, as I mentioned earlier, institutional uses, I should say, on residentially zoned lots like a school or church or so forth. And this is about interior setbacks. So we define interior yards as it could be an interior side yard. So the yards between abutting homes or abutting lots, or a rear yard. So some municipalities have separate standards for rear yards. They require a deeper rear yard than they would for a side yard. In our code, we regulate side and rear. Interior side and rear yards the same. They're all interior yards. So this is where that institutional use abuts. Excuse me. So the code does not say what the setback is from interior lot lines that abut an institutional zone or community facility zone or that abut unincorporated properties. So when we looked at this, we concluded that those side yards should be greater where the development is commercial, or if it's in a commercial zone and it's abutting this institutional use or community facilities use. And let me see if I'm getting this right. So interior yards of not less than 10 feet for development in the C1 or C2 zone when an interior lot line is common with a property zone residential, institutional, or community facilities. And for lots in any zone that abut an unincorporated property, we tried to follow the same logic that the setback would be 5 feet for residential development that's abutting that unincorporated property. But it would be greater, it would be 10 feet if it's a commercial or some other non-residential development that's abutting that, because the impact presumably of commercial use is greater than residential, but that's not always the case, but that's the sort of the thought process on that. We looked at, and Commissioner Wright, I think you had asked that we look at Yamhill County zoning and try to see if there was some reasonable way to calibrate our regulations based on that. Yamhill County zoning is all over the place. It could be a rural residential zone. It could be a farm use zone. There didn't seem to be a straightforward way of doing that. So
I concur. When I looked at some of the unincorporated properties, I definitely saw some extreme challenges trying to tailor the two codes to parallel each other. So, yes, thank you for looking into that.
And again, this was a place in our code where it was just blank. Like it didn't have any standard at all. So like, well, there should be a standard. And that's the approach on that one. I think the one that may be more significant for the community is the fence height. That's the next item. So the staff had actually initiated this and they wanted to look into it because their experience was that other jurisdictions allowed taller fences, taller than 6 feet in residential zones. And, you know, I was kind of skeptical, to be honest. So, oh, you sure about that? Prove it. Let's do some research. I want to understand this. So they did that. Actually, Jeremiah led the effort on that one. And Exhibit B2, which is on the back of the packet, provides a summary of what he found. And there it is. So Newburgh limits fence height to 6 feet, interior yard setbacks of 6 feet. So that's different than if you're in a front yard. So front yard's limited to 4 feet, but we're talking about interior yards. And, you know, the standards range from 6 feet to 8 feet. We do allow taller fences in commercial or industrial zones. That's not what we're asking about. We're really looking at residential zones. So if the commission had any thoughts about this or any feedback, it's really about giving people more ability to just have privacy screening between their properties. 7 feet is not that tall if you're a 6 foot tall person, which I'm not.
Commissioner Wright, what about residential properties that butt up against industrial zones? Can we put an exemption to allow the 8 foot to block off industrial area better?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd like to look at our fence standards to see if there's already some allowance for that. And I can get back to you on that as I'm looking it up. You know, and I just wanted to, in fairness, you know, there are other ways to approach this question. Adopting a standard that's, you know, an objective standard that everyone can understand is probably the most straightforward way to do that. That's why the proposal is for that. Another alternative would be to maintain the fence height standard at 6 feet, but create a code adjustment procedure or option where someone could request a taller fence, and then they would have to demonstrate why that's needed or that it wouldn't impact the neighbor in some negative way. We didn't want to suggest that because it seems like it's overly burdensome for property owners, but that would be another way to approach it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Newton Curtis.
Thank
So I have a question. When we're talking about fences, are we just talking about, wooden fences and chain link fences, and we're not talking about walls?
Well, it could be a wall. I mean, a wall can be a fence. So fences, it could be masonry, it could be, although at some point you're gonna have to get a building permit at a certain height.
The reason I ask is because I'm wondering if there should be some kind of definition associated with fence.
Yeah,
Well,
we can,
if there is, I'm wondering what it is.
yeah, we can look that up right now, in fact, so that. Be good.
Commissioner Mansfield here. Yeah, so even if we were to adopt the universal 7 feet, if someone, wanted to increase their fence heights past that, they could always put in a special permit request. And
Well,
then it would
currently
be
there,
evaluated.
yeah, Mr. Mansfield, currently there's no alternative pathway for that. It would require a variance, which is a very difficult burden, standard to meet, because you have to show that there's a hardship, that there's something that's unique to the property that, requires a taller fence. So there really isn't a pathway there currently other than a variance. Yeah. So back to the definition of fence. We'll get to that right. And of course, it's not defined. So there you go.
And so I'm wondering, and the reason I ask again is because in the next row down, it talks about fences and walls combined.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering if perhaps it might be an idea to define what we mean by fence. I mean, is that a possibility, or does that not come under this kind
Well,
of activity?
Yeah, so
Is there's, oh, sorry, keep
go-
going.
in the absence of a definition, we would defer to the common meaning of the term and we refer to the dictionary, Webster's or other sources, but I think it's generally understood that a fence is a fence. And that's actually a good segue when you're ready to go there and why we're considering that, combination of a fence and wall, why would we want to regulate that in terms of height? So.
Commissioner Mansfield to Commissioner Newton Curtis, is there something about fence or wall that you see a difference that you were worried about?
I wouldn't say that I was worried. I'm just thinking about people, for example, if you go into some neighborhoods, not necessarily in Newburgh particularly, but I don't know, if you think about Charbonneau, for example, they'll have patio areas that are screened off by walls, and the walls look like they're probably about 6 or 7 feet high, and they actually look really attractive with, wrought iron gates and things. And so that was my reasoning, really.
Yeah.
About the aesthetics.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen some city codes get into a lot of detail about. I worked on a code update for Tempe, Arizona, and if you're familiar with, Phoenix and Tempe area, there's masonry walls around everything, planned developments everywhere, and it's a lot of, there's a lot of concern about sound mitigation along busy streets, and so that's part of the reason that they have the masonry walls. We've intentionally tried to avoid getting into granular detail on regulating fence or wall appearance, but some places have said, well, you can have up to a 7 or 8 foot tall fence, provided the the top 1 foot or over a certain height, it has to be see-through. It has to be a lattice or something that's not opaque. We haven't gone there because it doesn't seem like the sort of the tradition or the culture here is to get to that level of granularity, but that's why the planning commission is here to judge that.
Yeah, Commissioner Mansfield here. I'm definitely an advocate for trying to keep it clear, simple, and straightforward. You know, it's definitely hearing some of those ideas that you've presented, Scott, that you've experienced in other places makes me worry that we would turn the city into its own version of an HOA by maybe over defining things. But yeah.
Commissioner Villapalma here. Say sorry I was late, but had problems logging in. My experience on fences, being a contractor and living in different states, it depends what kind of fence you're gonna install. If it's just a standard regular 4x4 with fencing boards, 6 foot, it's good enough. But sometimes people, they blocks, center blocks, rebar, booties, all that stuff that I think the county should know and be aware of as well, because that's a lot of weight and load and all that stuff that can go to your neighbors. So if it's not done properly, it really make big damage, So if we have a standard code for fences, 6 foot, on a wood fence, standard fence, but if other people tend to do stone or who knows, whatever you wanna do, we should be able to know how they're gonna do it, at least make sure that it's not gonna fall on your neighbors or yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And that's a really good point. I agree that, so we do have some control over that, and any fence that's over 7 feet in height, whether it's a wood frame fence or a masonry or chain link fence, it requires a building permit. So that's reviewed by the building department, and they look at footings and they look at the structural integrity of that. Same thing if it's a retaining wall, I think over 4 feet in height. There are building code requirements for that as well. So, and you may be familiar with that too. Okay. So if there were any concerns or any further questions on the fence height change, that's something that, or if there are none, then we would plan on coming back with that as part of the public hearing draft. It is a significant change, but there are other examples of communities that allow the 7 foot fence for residences.
Commissioner Mansfield, quick question here. Last month we had brought up kind of the discussion of how we define where that height is set, with the example being that someone wanted to find maybe a potential loophole by creating a 3 foot dirt mound on the edge of their property and putting that fence on top of it. Did the team go back and create a more precise definition of how the height of the fence is measured, or are we keeping that the way it was previously?
We did add on to that, so attempt to navigate there. So if you look at the code attachment, which is attachment A or exhibit A, on beginning at the bottom of page 18 of that document, that's where the fence height standard begins. And let's see. So we didn't actually propose any changes there, but in that, so I know we had talked about berms and other like mounding of soil. So editor's note, we said code 150503 defines height is measured from grade, while height for purpose of building code is measured from the bottom of the structure, including the footings or foundation. So those are two different methodologies. I think the building code method addresses that concern. If people are piling up soil, you're still measuring from the bottom of the footing. So no one is should be able to build a taller fence and avoid, going through the building permit process. But I think your point is, if it doesn't otherwise require a building permit, is that a loophole here? So let's go to that part of the proposal. That's on page 20. And I thought so combined fence and wall. And we've proposed that the fence and wall, or these two structures, would be measured together for purposes of height, so the 7-foot limit in the case of the side yard, when the fence is located within 5 feet of the face of the retaining wall on an upslope side. And then it's allowing well, not less than 8 feet in height. And it's,
And in our codes, for those who are concerned about masonry or concrete fence or wall, it also says taller than 4 feet, you have to have a permit.
that's
So
correct.
that I missed when I was reading it the first time.
That's right. In this combined fence and wall, D says berms, when used in conjunction with fences or walls, shall be included in height determinations. So I think the construction of this is a little off, that if that's something that we want to define as grade or the basis for height measurement, it should appear in both sections. It should appear under the D. In general, D, it should appear there that's how we're measuring it, that it's the finished grade or the filled grade, not the original grade.
So if I understand correctly, on that page 20, in that 5 combined fence wall, item B,
Or the original grade, excuse me, I had
the,
backwards.
the no fence shall be located either on top of or within 5 feet of the fence of the retaining wall on the upslope side when either the retaining wall or the fence is located within 10 feet of a public or private street or on an access easement which serves more than 2 lots. So thinking of the instance of your front yard is heavily sloped and you want to level that so that it's useful. And so you go and level that, but now, your retaining wall is maybe 4 feet. Let's just use that number because we know total combined height is 8 feet, but so you've leveled your front yard now so that it's useful. It's got a 4-foot high retaining wall and you're worried about someone falling off of that unwittingly. So you want to put in a fence according to this regulation here, because that retaining wall goes right up to the sidewalk. You wouldn't be able to do that. And that could then cause a liability scenario, correct?
So you would have to have that fence 10 feet back from the public right of way.
Potentially then, in that instance, on an average home, like in the middle of that front yard, a fence running right down the middle, I think that would look quite depressing.
Yeah, so so
Is this and then second question, sorry.
So
all
do
of
your
this
grade-
is new
yeah.
literature?
this is all new. So do your
Okay.
prepare your grading plan so that doesn't happen, so that people have usable yards, right?
Well, how could you say your yard's 20 feet, right? From front of the house to the sidewalk. You try to level it so that you could use that. But now you're worried about someone like a child or an adult falling off unwittingly because there's no fence on the edge there and cracking their skull on the sidewalk. So you want to put a fence in, the regulation would say you'd have to move it back 10 feet from that retaining wall and put it right through the middle of your yard. And so I think that would look quite
Yeah.
unsightly.
Yeah, apply for a variance. You've got a hardship and it's related to the site. So this is about not having,
But if it has the standard 8 feet anyway, what's the problem?
if what?
The total height of the combined wall has the standard 8 feet. They would only have a 4-foot fence there anyway. the combined height of the 4 foot retaining wall, and then
Is
you
it-
want to put in a fence so someone doesn't fall off on your front yard, so you're keeping it at 4 feet
Okay.
anyway.
So Commissioner Mance, is your concern that we're not allowing the fences are not allowed to be tall enough?
No, I'm saying under this ordinance, you wouldn't be able to put the fence in at all.
You'd have to put the fence back 10 feet from the right. of
Yeah,
way.
in the middle of your yard, which, why would you do that?
Within your hypothetical though, I mean, it's only hypothetical. I mean, we're not faced with this kind of stuff, so.
Well, in a new, so
I get it.
there's existing development. And an existing development, if you have a situation where there's already a 4-foot wall, back of sidewalk, and presumably you know, you, I'm thinking of a backyard, but maybe in your scenario is a front yard.
Yes.
So a front yard, you'd be limited to a 4-foot fence anyway. So within the setback, you could always put a taller fence up if it was not within the front yard setback.
Well, according to this item B, it says no fence, regardless of height, can be within the 5 feet.
That should be top.
On page 20, item 5, combined fence and wall dash B, no fence shall be located either on top or within 5 feet of the retaining wall, the face of the retaining wall, on the upside slope, when either the retaining wall or the fence is located within 10 feet of the public private street or private street.
Right, so you've got to
on
push,
easement.
you've got to move the fence 5 feet back from the face of the retaining wall. Right?
Be at least 5 feet back.
Yeah.
I would say we remove that whole section. I think that walking through downtown, especially on or not walking through Newburgh, especially on the north side of town, there's plenty of homes that are, their front yards are sloped or built on grade, and I've seen quite a few have small retaining walls on them. And half of them have fences already, but the ones that don't would have to have those set back. And, personally, I think that looks quite unsightly anyway, to have that setback versus having it right on the edge. It creates a whole strip of unusable space.
Okay, so there's existing development, then there's new development or new land divisions and sites that are developed with housing. And is your concern with the existing lot that someone has a retaining wall?
No, my concern is future development. I mean, I feel like it's an unnecessary thing to regulate on our citizens.
Okay, so of course, this is trying to avoid the situation along the street, the back of the sidewalk, where there's 10 feet of edifice next to you as you're walking down a corridor of walls and fences. So is there any scenario where that's not acceptable in your mind?
Well, already it would be 8 feet, right?
Yeah.
Not 10, but I think that when I look at it, one, I don't see that happening throughout our community, people putting up giant walls, but I do see people wanting to put small retaining walls in their front yards to level them and make them usable. And then there's definitely the concern of, if I have a ledge the height of this table at the edge of my yard, I don't want someone to walk and miss it and fall down, 3 feet. If I'm gonna have friends over or my kids are playing in the front yard and I want to put a fence and I want to maximize that front yard space, I think the average citizen would be pretty peeved that they have to pull that back and shrink up their front yard and that usable space by that 5 feet. I mean, maybe we could adjust it so the combined height on a public right of way has to stay shorter than that. That way they can put a protective measure there for people. Even just the thought of, people are gonna kick a ball back and forth in the front yard and they don't want it to roll off that yard, off the retaining wall and into the street, having some sort of protective measure there.
Okay, well,
why
this is why we have work sessions to flesh it out. Are there other thoughts about the street face and the combination of walls and fences there? Is this a solution in search of a problem, or is it a real problem potentially that we want to try to solve?
I would also say if the concern is about walking down a tunnel of tall fencing, we could alternatively just ask that that fence not be opaque, but have some level of translucency.
Other thoughts, comments?
Commissioner Wright, I would also agree that some people need to do this in their front yards for erosion and sediment retention. In order not to alter their foundations in the future from erosion and things like that. So I think it does impede in people's front yards with that 10 feet back from the front yard, regardless if it's a 4-foot fence or not. And I agree with Commissioner Mansfield that that including that you can't have anything within 5 feet of that retainer wall. And say somebody buys a house that does have an erosion problem and they put one in. Then they're going to have to comply with the new code. And I agree that that is going to take away from their property values and aesthetics and livability issues with the city as well. But I'm not sure of the language to promote in that. And is there also a way that we can create a pathway residential for an 8-foot fence? Thank you. Commissioner Wright.
I have a question. You're talking about the corridor effect. How would that ever be on, like, walking down a street, and people's front yards? I can see backyards, but not front yards. Well, I mean, if you're walking on the street here, and, you know, here, and yeah, you look over there, okay, sure. But even just right next to yourself, it's in our hypothetical, it's retaining wall and then fence, or retaining wall directly in fence, or retaining wall back and then fence, right? That's the two scenarios. Okay, so let's look at both sides. So if what you're saying is no rules, just if they could put it they could put it on it or back or what, or
Yeah, I
whatever.
think what I'm proposing is that one, we keep to a front yard fence needs to be a maximum of
and
4
we're only
feet
talking about
tall.
front yards at this point.
Yes, this side,
Yeah.
I'm talking front yards, 4 feet tall. When your fence or retaining wall is located within 10 feet of the public or private street.
Okay.
And so
Yeah. And then so and then the regulation that the other side of that is we're intending to impose regulation that it has to be 5 foot back from the fence, or 5 foot back from the retaining wall, correct?
Right.
And the intent of that is to preclude a corridor
Right.
effect,
Just
essentially.
break up the
Yeah, the
facade,
break up
yeah.
the texture of what you're seeing, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, the sheer wall.
Yeah. I would think actually he's correct, and not because it's going to do one thing or another, but because it's going to introduce variance. You're going to have one guy on the long block that wants it there. Then you're going to have another guy that wants to set it back 5 feet. Then another guy wants to set it back 2 feet, 3 feet, or nothing, or roses, or, hedges, or I don't know.
yeah,
something.
that has one.
So, and as a general rule, I'm more in favor of less regs than more regs. So
I'm also concerned about that, just to keep hammering home my ideas, sorry, is that if you do create that 5-foot barrier, there, and there's that middle space, and you create then that unsafe opportunity that you were trying to do by putting the fence in together, because you have a 5-foot zone where there's still that drop off. And
that was backyard.
I'm talking front yard. you've got high school kids walking back home from school, jumps up on the thing because he can, because it's 3 foot tall and there's no fence there, and then he, no, but he trips and falls and hurts himself, and because there's nothing there to stop him from falling off that ledge that he just jumped on. In this hypothetical scenario, very specific scenario that maybe only 1% of people who build a fence and retaining wall are worried about, that they want that fence right there. You know, that'd be a great option. I don't think we can put that in our planning code. But you know, I'm thinking about that instance. I want of the idea of I want to put an retaining wall to level my lawn. I want to put a fence there to make sure my kids don't run off and fall and hurt themselves. If I have to put it 5 feet back, then I'm creating still a strip where other people or my children can choose when we get out of the car to go run up on the front side of the house and still hurt themselves. So then I don't do the fence at all, or I still, you know, it impedes that possibility. But like Commissioner Dale said, not putting a restriction in there allows for whatever variance. Someone might want to push it back a few feet to put flower beds in the front. Someone might want it at all. You know,
I've
all
got,
sorts of
I've got the
different-
counter, I've got the counter to that argument. Whoever, in the absence of regulation, whoever doesn't decide, or whoever decides to put their fence back and allows the kids to do that is taking the risk themselves, and it's not our business.
Exactly.
Right, so we don't need to regulate it.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If they choose
Okay.
to put it back, that's on them.
Right.
But if you can't let them put it forward
Okay.
and something happens,
understand the
then
statement.
that could be a you know, a suit on the homeowner, that could be a suit on the city.
That's,
And
that's on them.
yeah, yeah.
So are we saying that we should get rid of 5B entirely?
Yes, that's what I'm proposing. I think we can eliminate 5B. I think the addition of maintaining I'm open to having item B say that the total height of the combined fence and wall, if they're right on top of each other, is less than 8 feet, if that's the real concern. But if you put it 5 feet back, you can make it taller. You know, I'm open to if that's the concern of the corridor. But
And if we came back with a proposal that eliminated B, that would be the result, that it would have that allowance for up to, well, it says less than 8 feet, perhaps it should say not more than 8 feet, just to be clear. And, right, where it's on top of or within 5 feet. So, you know, another, just to be completely objective and, and balanced about this, another potential unintended consequence of having that 5 foot setback or recess between the wall and the fence is, you know, you've got people like you said who are going to want to landscape it and it'll be beautiful, but then you have, you know, more often than not, it's either landscaped and it's not maintained, or it's not landscaped at all and it's just a blank space up there. So,
yeah,
you know,
exactly. I'm
I-
mowing my lawn and I'm not going to walk around to the front and get up on the retaining wall to mow that section because
yeah.
I don't have access to it.
So I've seen that be successful. I've also seen it fail. And, you know, when you have a plan development with HOAs and you have these areas that are defined, and it may even be a terracing, not just one, you know, setback with the fence, but a terracing up a hillside, and there's some maintenance happening there, it can be lovely, but when it's not, it's not lovely. So I think you've made a good case for not having that in there, and I appreciate it. Okay. Is everyone comfortable then with allowing up to 8 feet? I mean, this is not a decision that you're making, but we'll come back for the hearing, and the proposal will say not more than 8 feet measured from the lower side of the retaining wall. It also has language in here that the materials must be different than for the fence than the wall. It's not just a solid wall up to 8 feet. And the berms, if you're using a berm, then we're still measuring height from, what does it say here? Berms, when used in conjunction, shall be included in the height determination. So that's sort of avoiding the loophole where you just pile up a bunch of dirt and build your fence on top of it.
Commissioner Rickert, why wouldn't we make that height, the overall height, consistent with our last topic on fence height, which was 7 feet, right? But then this one is overall, we're saying 8 feet. I mean, why wouldn't it just be consistent all the way through?
It's a good point. I think generally with walls, the assumption is that that's a retaining wall. And so it's, by definition, it's holding back dirt on one side.
Right.
And so really what we're concerned with is the height on the down slope side as it's measured. So it's affording some flex, maybe it's only a foot, but it's affording a little bit more height to try to provide that privacy on the uphill side, or to provide some additional height.
Yeah, and to keep in mind, if it's a front yard, that fence is still only fixed to 4 feet tall maximum. So they'd have to have a 4 foot tall retaining wall to combine that to 8 feet. Or on the other side of things, if it's a backyard, it's a total of 8 feet. If they have a 4 foot tall retaining wall, they can only have a 4 foot fence instead of a 7 foot fence in a different instance.
Yeah.
Do I understand that correctly?
That's my understanding, yes.
It also wouldn't match visually as you meet up with the backyard fence. So it's gonna be a 4 foot fence then like this, no matter what, because of the lower part of the retaining
Great.
wall. So,
Great.
visually, it's gonna be like that.
So, we're thinking about these things as we see more land development up, north of Mountain View and going up the hill. We'll want to monitor that, come back to this if it's not effective, or if we're hearing that it's not providing flexibility, if I'm not able to, fence in my yard and protect my family,
I just.
Commissioner Wright, there's also a logistics to this also. I actually built a fence on a slope just this year. And most of the fencing boards are sold at 6 foot now, and the posts are 8. So if you have to go like 5 feet plus a retaining wall, then you're having to pay somebody to cut off 1 foot of each one. And that could greatly, even with new development, add to the cost of developing those types of fences. And it would be good for us to kind of keep it standardized for what they sell in that community, as a thought. That's all.
Commissioner Rickard, just another comment. I'm not for or against it. I just, really for discussion, which I think is great discussion, but it is to me about consistency. When in one instance, we're saying 8 feet, and then we're talking about a fence at 7 feet. And then in our very first topic, we talked about a garage and we wanting to add windows to increase the appeal of the facade. Well, when you increase a fence another foot to 7 feet, you're not really creating a nicer facade. And now, same thing with our next one, where we're talking about a retaining wall and making it even taller. I just find that it's a little inconsistent. If we want good street appeal, I just find these three topics kind of contradicting each other a little bit.
I think of them as two separate things, front fences and back fences. That helps me to alleviate that, but maybe that doesn't for you.
Well, the fence standards also apply inside yards or between homes too. So, but your point's well taken. I think that the fence height limit in front yards addresses that, or it's intended to address that appearance. Yeah. Okay, shall we move on to the next topic, or, okay. So the next one that we've highlighted here relates to accessory buildings
Can
for
I just ask
institutional.
a quick question?
Yes.
Have we made a decision on that last topic?
Well, I kind of what I took away from your discussion, and we'll come back. Just based on your discussion. Yeah. Okay. Were there other aspects? Okay.
This is Commissioner Wright. For some reason, last couple times when people have spoke, the audio or mics completely go out and there's no talk at all. Just to let you know. That it's kind of going in and out at times.
Internet's been really inconsistent for me the last few days. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you, Commissioner Dale.
Okay. So I'm going to refer everyone to the very last page in this packet, and this summarizes our research into institutional uses and the number of accessory structures that they have. We talked about this at your last meeting, and it's all over the board. So, we were trying to see if there was any signal through the noise in terms of like how many accessory structures the various schools or church properties have. And these are all properties, I believe, that are in residential zones. The current limit is 2 accessory structures, and that I think was established primarily with residential uses or single-family homes in mind, although it applies to all uses in those zones. And what we found is that the number of structures on these properties range from 1 to 6, or 1 to 9, excuse me. And the percentage of lot coverage that they represent is very small, less than 1% of the site. So that these are small structures generally. One sort of nuance to this is that the way our code is set up, if a modular classroom, for example, is within 5 feet of the main building, the school building or the church building, it's considered to be, it's not attached, but it's considered to be part of that main building in terms of the footprint. And it's not considered to be an accessory structure, even though it is its own structure. So the number of buildings or the number of accessory structures on some of these sites may be more than this, but that's not how they're defined, for what it's worth.
Commissioner Mansfield,
yeah.
just sorry to ask this question, but if they put another mobile school structure next to the one that's within 5 feet, does that still count? Or
it can become a daisy chain.
Can it or can it not, I guess is the question. And yes, it can. Okay, just thank you.
And if that's something that we need to look at further in the future, we can look at that, but I think it's really a separate issue from trying to define how many sheds or how many, yeah. Yeah, so, the purpose of this bit of research was to try to, discern if there was a kind of a lot coverage metric that might make sense so that the standard could scale based on the size of the property. And what we found is that it doesn't really, I don't think it'll work very well that way. So what we came to was a proposal that would allow more than 2 accessory structures on these properties, as many of them already have more than 2 structures, provided the current standards are met, including there's a 25-foot setback. Now, some of these properties have accessory structures that are located closer to the property line than that, so those would be allowed. They would be non-conforming, perhaps, if there were more than 2 of them on the property. So you could have up to 2 consistent with other uses in the residential zone, placed at the minimum setback, whatever that might be, 5 feet. But if you have more than that, the proposal is that you would comply with the 25-foot setback for primary uses or institutional uses in that zone. There's also a height limit of 16 feet for accessory structures in some zones, including R1, R3, AR, and RP. And then it allows an exception to that up to 800 square feet, where you can go up to a taller height, 24 feet. So this seemed to be the path of least resistance. I don't know that it's the correct path, but we wanted to put that in front of you to consider. So you've got the limit of 2 accessory structures, as any property owner, any property in a residential zone would have. But as an institutional use, you can go beyond that, provided you meet the 25-foot setback and these other standards that already exist. Does that sound reasonable? Is that too restrictive, more restrictive?
Seems fine to me too.
I guess just as a question, looking at the percentage of accessory structure area, percentage of lot accessory structure area, like you said, everything's under 1%. Would it not be easier to just put in a, can't exceed 1%?
Just establish a cap and let it, any number within that.
Yeah.
I mean, that is another way to approach it. The numbers are so small that we were uncomfortable, like without some, guidance from you all on whether we should do this. Another alternative or an additional sort of safety valve in this, if you will, that we were considering is if, there's always the variance process, but that's really the last resort. If, if the commission thought, well, there might be churches or schools or other institutional uses that would need, more than two, and they would need to be closer to the property line. And, if it's not having a negative impact on the neighbors, would that not be acceptable? And how would you review that? So, the way to approach that would be to say you could permit more than that number or reduce the setback with the conditional use permit, then it comes before the planning commission. So that would be another alternative, but we didn't want to volunteer that without asking you first.
I personally think that's a really bad idea.
Okay.
Just.
I understand. That's why we're asking.
Yeah, I thinking about it, what you've proposed already, I think is going to be best.
That addresses it, yeah. And again, some properties that are not. Sorry. Commission. Oh. Okay, well, then I won't belabor it. If we're okay with moving forward with that, then that's what we'll propose. The last one that we had discussed that was not altogether clear or resolved, I think the last time we met, was on signs, and that's at the bottom of this table. Signs that are more than 20 feet in height, greater than 20 feet in height. And the staff had asked, well, are signs greater than 20 feet in height even allowed in Newburgh? Is that something that the code allows? It's not clear. There is one exception for signs that are on 10-acre sites or sites that are greater than 10 acres, and then they cannot exceed 30 feet in height. But it doesn't really say anything else about signs that are greater than 20 feet. So the language that is proposed here is on pages 23 and 24 of the code attachment. And so this is for zones other than C3. So C3 are downtown zone limits, freestanding signs to not more than 6 feet in height. That's why you don't see, a lot of pole signs in the downtown, thankfully. In other zones, it does have standards that are based on height and setbacks. So a sign that's like at the top of page 24, a sign that's taller than 6 feet in height up to 8 feet must be set back 10 feet from any front property line, 5 feet from any interior property line. And then it sort of scales up. You can go taller and then the setbacks increase. So what we've proposed is adding or clarifying that a sign taller than 20 feet is not permitted except as allowed under this new or revised subsection G, which is that 10-acre site in C1 or I zones. And it has to meet these standards.
Is this something that's coming up with people, giant signs?
It's not coming up. And the reason that it came to our attention was that someone was looking at installing a flagpole in their yard. I think it was a residential zone. And the question was, how tall can it be? And we said, well, what is it? And a flag is one, in the definition of sign, a flag is a sign, right? So that's how we came to this question about height. Pardon me?
That would be inconsistent.
If
So-
if placed on a containing wall. So for the flagpole, you defined not the height of the flag, but how high the flag reaches
Well, the pole is
is the signage itself.
yeah, the pole is part of that display of a sign, right? A flag.
Okay.
And so we don't believe that we're making a policy change here. We think that that was the intent, but the code wasn't clear. And so the proposal is to clarify that.
I believe we talked about that back in the day, last time we did sign stuff.
Oh, you
About,
did?
about
Okay.
distances, not height, but how far away before you get, gigantic signs.
Good. So, and that, I think that concludes the major or somewhat major changes that we had discussed that we needed to do some further research on. I'm more than happy to dive down into any of the sections here that you have questions about or wanted to discuss. What we've tried to be true to what was presented at the last meeting in terms of turning the concepts into draft code language.
I do have a quick question on the signage here. I remember during our Newburgh campaign season, many people who had fence frontage that was in ideal areas put large signs on the back of or on the outside face of their fence to advocate for whichever candidate they believed in. Would that have gone against this regulation?
I need to look into that more closely. I haven't looked to see if we have temporary sign allowances and if if it would fall under that, if we regulate temporary signs differently.
Commissioner Mansfield, and staff, I think we covered that and we removed like some signs completely out of our codes because especially when it came to political signs, people were coming and bothering the city too much and they couldn't get anything done during one of the years. It was a horrible problem, so I think it was actually
You're
removed from
cutting out,
code.
Chris.
Okay, I think it was removed from code, but you might want to check that when it came to like political signs and things like that because of so much interruption to the city. I think we might have removed the previous verbiage for that.
Chris, we only caught about 10% of that. I think your internet's faulty.
Probably. Can you hear me now?
Good now, but can you just repeat that?
I think in the code a couple years ago or 1 or 2 years ago, we actually removed political signs from our code because there was such disruption to city staff. So I don't even think we have any regulations for political signs anymore. And I don't know if that is a very good question, Commissioner Mansfield, because yes, I did see some very large signs on fences, and it was that to me is questionable underneath our signage uh, issues here. But anyway,
And
thank you for bringing that up.
on that note as well, continuing with signs on fences, I believe as you enter town on 99, heading south off of Rex Road, there's that new that is definitely a 15-foot tall sign right on the property line. So I'm curious, just to make sure, one, I understand the regulation well. Is that technically in violation of this code as it is amended?
That's another question that's beyond, outside of my purview or pay grade. So that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that without looking into it more closely.
I guess I would what I'd say as a worried about the verbiage. I don't want citizens to get in the, harassing each other using the code to get things in the way. It almost seems as if you're putting a sign on your fence, as long as it doesn't exceed the footprint of the fence, that shouldn't be a problem. I don't know how we need to make that a specialty clause or something like that, but I do remember, both for instances like your city doesn't pay its water, that could be somewhat of a contentious sign that would easily inspire someone to use city code to use it vindictively. Same thing with a campaign, and people putting up political signs. Like Chris Wright was mentioning, that there was enough trouble with the city using coded verbiage to kind of harass people. So I guess I'm just throwing that back to you guys to think about that, examine that, maybe add a different addendum for public comment. Thank you.
Okay. Received. Comment received. Thank you.
Do you
Chair,
have anything else?
I do not have anything else to share with you this evening.
Is it
Thank you.
okay with everybody if we move on to the next agenda item? So items from staff updates for the planning commission.
I think we've already discussed the hearing that's scheduled now for September 11th. We have notified the state DLCD of the code amendments. And if we receive any comments from them, we'll of course, share those with the commission and try to respond before we get to your hearing. And I'll ask Ms. Bates, do we have any other items scheduled? Do we have any hearings that you're aware of? Okay, thank you. That's all that we have this evening.
Any items from the commissioners?
Yes,
Okay.
Commissioner Wright.
Okay.
At this time, I would like to request for policy review on sidewalk installation responsibility. Dear Planning Commission, I am expressing my concern about the current policy that places the financial responsibility for sidewalk installation and maintenance on adjacent property owners, even when the sidewalk lies within the public right-of-way. While I understand the importance of safe pedestrian infrastructure, this approach raises serious questions of fairness and sustainability. Sidewalks are public assets used by all and maintained inconsistently and yet funded disproportionately by individual homeowners here in Newburgh. Our codes read that okay. I'm going to go over to a different letter here. Okay. Within our Newburgh Municipal Code 12, Division 12-05440, streets and sidewalks, down to noticing. Things like if a mistake in the name of the owner or agent or a name other than that of a true owner or agent such a property shall not render void such notice, but in such case the postal notice shall be sufficient. And that's being notified that you have to build a sidewalk. And it is written in our codes that you, by order of the city engineer, have to build a sidewalk of Portland cement construction. And I would like to hope, because this could really be an avenue in basically taking people's property if they get a lien put on their properties, such as a senior, person of disability, a person having even ample means, having other financial issues they need to have done. The average cost of construction, even a 100-foot by 5-foot sidewalk in Oregon, based on material cost of $11.78 to $15 per square foot, with labor costs of $9 per square foot, ends up being $5,500 to $6,600, depending on the concrete type, thickness, and any additional features. So I would like to hope that we can get a move to add a financial exception or have the city council and staff look into alternatives needed for senior, disabled, or other issues, such as a person getting in an accident. As written, it could be a pathway to eviction or losing a property by forcing landowners to put in or maintain a sidewalk within 90 days of notice with low or no income, or in unusual circumstances without providing financial assistance programs. And what I'd like to see is the city really either access these programs like the statewide program, Restore Health and Safety Program, administered by Oregon Housing and Community Service. They offer financial assistance for home repairs, including the structural and safety related modifications that may involve sidewalks. But they do prioritize veterans and funded by the document recording fee. Accessing things like this. Trails program where trails meet sidewalks, maintenance accessibility programs and plans might also have funding. Places like Oregon City Sidewalk Replacement Assistant Grant reimburses up to $1,500 per tree disturbance. Say like you buy a house here, you did not put in the tree that's out front, but it's undermined the sidewalk. And now by law, you have to replace it to keep it in good maintenance, as Commissioner Mansfield pointed out. By law, if anybody trips on your property, regardless in the right of way, you are liable by law. So I would love to see a maintenance program to help homeowners here. Is that a possibility? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Chris. I'm just not
Sorry.
sure.
Sorry.
I don't know here who has the authority to answer that question.
I can give some feedback. First, I do have a question. Was that a letter that was sent to you as like a public comment, or was that just you were just,
No, just me. When I started reading through it,
you were reading a
Eh,
letter? It was,
when I started reading through the rest of the law or charter concerning streets and sidewalks, I I I found that this could be a real huge barrier for seniors and people with disabilities or having some financial issue, and it would scare me to death to lose my property over something like that.
so
And I
have
did notice, yeah. Go ahead, Faye.
we do have a program that maintenance is doing that we just got started. It's where they will come and our maintenance department will replace the sidewalk at their cost, which is usually cheaper than a contractor. And so we do have that program coming in. That's just started, so it's just getting into play. And this year we didn't, but in past years we have had grants available for people. We just didn't have access to it this year.
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed that grant opportunity myself with some things going on, and when I called back, it had been already been stopped. All right. Thank you, Faye.
Is there a payment plan associated with the new program that's being put in place for residents?
At this time, there is not. I know that they are taking. They ask for 50% down, and then the rest when they get done with the work.
Would it be something that we could propose that there should be a payment plan associated with that? Because, I mean, if the person couldn't repay, then typically a lien would go against the house in any case, right? And again, I've got no idea whether that's a possibility or not.
I think if the commission wanted to prepare a recommendation, it would be outside of the scope generally of your, land use planning work. At a minimum, you'd want to put it on your agenda so you could deliberate on that. People could, come before the commission. It would be, it's not really a land use planning matter, but I don't want to interfere with your, with your discussion on this important community issue.
Well, would this be something to address to city council directly?
Yeah, I think you could. I mean, you could make your your thoughts known to the council as individuals, as community members. You could do that. I'm not seeing how it really fits within the scope of the planning commission, but that's for you to decide.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the updating the language and the codes. As long as we're doing that, I was hoping that we could add a financial option for our citizens so they don't go down this awful pathway of losing their home now or in the future for whatever reasons that may come up concerning that.
I mean, it
All
has
right.
a budgetary impact, so that's why I would suggest directing your comments to the city council.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
I'd like to just make one more comment on that, Commissioner Wright. There could be an avenue to travel through the Newburgh Affordable Housing Commission too. They have the trust fund that's set up to help in situations like this too. And I think it's just a simple application to fill out. One of the challenges with that though is the Affordable Housing Commission only meets quarterly. So you know, if you need the funds immediately, it's probably not the best avenue to travel, but there is an option out there.
Yeah, and I actually did apply for it personally. At my house smashed into the ground by 3 trees that fell. So I did apply for it, and only now, and that was 3 years ago, and I'm only getting the application now. So this is 3 years later, and I've already had my house raised now. So there's a huge need there for obviously help and repairs for homeowners. And that just kind of shows me how much help that is really needed out there. 3 years. That's a long time to wait for an immediate need. But I appreciate everybody, and I thank you for letting me put that out there. I will direct this to City Council. I do have a letter written up already for that. And staff, I really appreciate all that you have done and for the additional request and information from the Planning Commission workshop for July 10th. I really appreciate the time and all the other commissioners for all that you do. Everybody have a great night.
Cheers.
Anything else from commissioners? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.